Hello everybody. Today you're going to be watching a panel discussion where we'll be talking about a class that we took regarding constructive conversations, and we'll be summarizing what we learned and discussing some important points. My name is Carmen Wood, and I'm currently out of the classroom and working with ELD students and coaching teachers, so that gave me an opportunity to be in a couple of different classrooms during this process. And here to my right, we have Erica.
My name is Erica Pantel, and I am a third grade teacher, and I have ELD students in my classroom. I'm responsible for their instruction for those students, and took this class to hopefully better myself in the ability to teach all of my students about conversations and Common Core. Jen?
And I'm Jennifer Renner, and I teach first grade. I have ELD students as well in my classroom, as well as mainstreamed students in my room.
Okay, so I thought that if we just sort of went through chronologically our experience taking the class, this class was offered through Stanford, and it was a massive open online course, and teachers from all over the world participated. And it was specifically about the power of constructive conversations to increase not only language learning but content area learning, specifically for EL students. So I thought I'd just ask you, when you first heard about the class and you read about the introduction, what were some of your first thoughts as you were signing up and just looking forward to getting into the class?
Well, I think with Common Core here around the corner, and some schools I know are already implementing it, I know I needed to find ways to develop conversations within my classroom. And I've already done a lot of partner work, but I needed to go much deeper and more meaningful conversations. So that's originally was my goal for taking this class, to try to build that into my classroom and improve my current instruction with it.
Erica, what were you thinking?
Well, I wasn't sure exactly what to think about the class. I wasn't really sure what I was getting myself into, but I do know, as Jen was saying, that Common Core for us is just around the corner, and I too have done a lot of partner work with my students and partner conversations, but not at the level that I felt like I needed, that they needed to be for this new for the Common Core. So I really didn't know what to expect, and I just wanted to learn more about it.
Get ahead of it, right?
Yeah.
What I was kind of expecting was that I was really expecting that the pace would be a little bit slower, and that most of what we were going to be learning was going to be about how to set a stage and sort of creating that classroom culture where conversations could take place. But what I realized is that there was going to be a lot more academic discussion involved, and that we were going to have to move our students really quickly through this continuum. I'm curious, what were your first thoughts when you actually got into assignment, when you realized what we were going to be doing?
Well, right, I agree with you. I thought there would be a little bit more at the beginning of how do you even set up your students to be having conversations with each other. And I realized, fortunately, my kids were already used to, talking to each other, and but I realized how much more I needed to model after that, and how much direct instruction I would have to do with the students on how to have those conversations and prompts, and really just scale it back and look at each individual part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
From the first assignment, it helped me to focus in on exactly what it was that was expected from the course, and reading through the materials that were provided helped me to kind of start focusing myself on what the expectations were, so that I could then go forward from there. So that's basically what that first assignment did for me.
even clarifying building. I don't even think I ever thought about the conversations my students were having as far as are they building on one another.
Right.
So that was kind of that, when we finished assignment 1, I was like, okay.
Exactly, and that piece of it, that building piece, was the part that was so significant.
Yes.
Because that's a piece that was missing in the partner work my students have been doing before. Before, I
Exactly.
was happy if they just had a conversation back and forth a little bit. They could look at something and talk about it for 2 seconds. And I think,
Yes.
yay, they're talking in
Yes.
academic. But that building piece, just so powerful.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, getting really specifically into assignment 1, a big game changer there for me as far as my expectations was looking at this conversation analysis tool that's referred to as the CAT. And it's a sliding rubric scale, and there are 2 areas where we had to analyze our student conversations. One area was, are the statements that they're making to each other building an idea together? Is the whatever student A said directly connected to student B in some way? And then the second big part we had to analyze was, are the things that they're saying to each other connected to the curriculum, and can we document sort of this trail of learning? As they're talking, are they really learning? And it wasn't having to film the students, and I went to film in Jen's classroom that day, little first graders, and they really exceeded my expectations as far as following social protocols for having a conversation. But then when I looked at the conversation analysis tool and I had to really focus on exactly the back and forth in the words they were saying, I started kind of getting an inkling that if you take the time as a teacher to really analyze these conversations, it opens a window into their actual thought process. And so that was really intriguing to me. Do you have anything else that you want to say about assignment 1 before we move on?
Well, I think the CAT tool was helped to be objective, as any rubric does, because now you're looking at it from a different lens. And it, again, that focusing piece was great in that, with being able to use that CAT tool. So you knew where to kind of take your students, what were the next steps. That CAT tool helped me to be able to kind of hone in on that.
Mm-hmm.
I was sharing earlier with the CAT tool, I probably should have, but I did not review the CAT tool before I did the lesson, but I'm actually glad I didn't, because I think I had a better understanding of it by analyzing it, by using it with an actual conversation instead of, I don't know, just help me understand it.
Yeah, and I think having really authentic data that wasn't in any way, we didn't really have time to try and shape those conversations before we recorded that first one.
Right.
And then I thought that was really important to get a good benchmark of where we were starting with our students.
Yeah, right. Because as it turns out, I did not do any pre-teaching of how to converse at all, because I was so new at it. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to be doing. And so my lesson prior to the conversations was what they were supposed to be learning academically, and not about how to converse. So it was really kind of one-sided as far as the CAT tool was concerned, because it was more about the academic piece, and I expected students to do better with that section of the CAT tool. But they actually did okay with the conversation building. I mean, it wasn't horrible,
Right.
but obviously I learned a lot from it.
There were some things you looked at, you're like, yay, they actually are doing it, but then you could, like you were saying, you could plan your next steps.
Yeah.
And I did, pretty simple modeling before that first lesson, and that was something I definitely changed in assignment 2 and 3. The modeling was much deeper.
You needed to get real, yeah,
than it was
needed
the
to get
first
really
time.
specific. So for our second assignment, we didn't have to film any conversations, but I think assignment 2 was really most of the meat that we were going to be given during this course. There was a lot of reading, very specific descriptions of skills that you could teach your students. And we were provided with this, it's called the Constructive Conversation Skills Poster. So moving into assignment 2, after analyzing the first conversations that we recorded, we were given a lot of reading and quite a few organizational tools, graphic organizers. I think the one that I used the most was called the Constructive Conversation Skills Poster. So there are 4 skills that we can specifically teach our students, and there were sentence stems that went with each skill. So the 4 conversation skills are create, clarify, fortify, and finally negotiate. So I'd like us to talk for a little bit about what skill we decided to focus on for assignment 2 and why we made that choice. Fleshing out assignment 2 was creating a lesson and planning the best place for a constructive conversation to be inserted. So Jennifer, why don't you start us off on this one?
So for assignment 2, my class, we just finished reading a nonfiction story about firefighters. And it didn't have a lot of detail within the story, so I wanted the kids to kind of go back originally and use creating and clarifying jobs that firefighters did. And then I pushed it onto negotiating which job was the most important and why. So I kind of had a hard time just limiting just to one of those 4 on the poster, because I wanted to overlap. So our conversations went on and on, because we started in one place, and then from there, after they'd done the creating and clarifying, then we moved into the negotiating.
I remember reading your transcript or your assignment and thinking to myself, oh my gosh, these are first grade students and all that they were doing. It was very impressive. I chose just the clarifying piece because I felt that after reflecting on the first assignment, that's where my kids needed to go. So I used a language arts lesson as well, and I wanted to specifically teach the students about conversations and what clarifying conversations were. So we discussed the first conversation that my students had and how we could improve upon that. So that's why I chose the clarifying. So as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to use clarifying. So I thought it would be more powerful for my students to maybe come up with some sentence starters to help to be able to clarify their conversations. And I was quite surprised by what they came up with. And obviously I had my own tool that was provided by the class to use to, make sure and guide them and get the important ones in. But I felt like they came up with a pretty good list themselves. And this is what we came up with. We had just been to a field trip to a local wetlands, and the kids got to use binoculars, so I brought in binoculars and used that to help start this whole conversation. So it was fun coming up with what was needed, and as far as sentence starters go, and these are words that the kids are comfortable with as well. So.
And then don't you think they used it because they had ownership over it? They
Yes.
were part of it.
Yes.
They built on each other, and then they used it.
Exactly.
Within their conversations. So
Yes.
it's 2 parts of it.
Well, I decided to take my students. I was making a shift from filming Jen's first graders, and I was going to be moving back into a 7th and 8th grade ELD class. And from having spent some time observing in there, I realized that I really just needed to get them relaxed with having conversations where our target was going to be more academic. They were really anxious about saying the right thing and having the right answer, so I didn't choose any of those skills. They needed a different skill of learning how to just keep going with their own thinking and saying their thoughts. And that was really difficult for them. So I made a game where the partner who wasn't doing most of the talking would have some little prompts to kind of push the other kid to continue following a line of thought. So that's what I focused on for assignment 2, and I really appreciated the fact that during the video instruction in that component, I felt very empowered and encouraged to branch out and do whatever my students needed. So is there anything else that you'd like to share about assignment 2 that wasn't filmed, but we did, follow this protocol with our students? Is there anything else you'd like to share before we move on?
On that one, that's where I tried to bring in the concrete. I used the linker cubes to help the kids on what does it mean to build. And so in assignment 1, I had done a model conversation with a student, and it was so-so. It wasn't great. So in this one, I did a model conversation with our class mascot, Froggy. It's just a stuffed animal. But I spoke for him, and then I, of course, spoke for myself. And I used, after the kids created all the different jobs the firefighters had, I put one linker cube for each one of those ideas and talked about how those are separate ideas. And then the mascot and I built our conversations on each other. Every time we could build, then we would link the cubes together just to show the difference. And then I did examples and non-examples, and that seemed to really help. And so much of that lesson was spent on modeling. And then I noticed my kids later, I think because I used the linker cubes, on other activities we were doing in class, they're like, oh, that's building, you built on that. Or,
right.
And I think doing the non-examples and examples helped to really clarify what's building and not. So
I thought that was
helped.
so powerful.
Yeah, and I ended up using the Charlie Brown teacher of the wah, 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 because obviously, so we paired up, and one student would go wah, 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 and then the other student would say something like, I'm not sure I understood what you said, so they used their the sentence starters that we had, and they didn't have to be so caught up in academic vocabulary and those kinds of things. It was just focused on this, and that was kind of the first part of that lesson, was more all about the conversations, and kid light bulbs were going on. Oh, I see what you're saying now. And when we actually went into the full-blown conversations, it was much better because they were able to clarify.
I think that's a good point of practicing with something that's not taxing them academically.
Right.
Right.
Because it's hard if you try to do both at the same time.
Yes.
So I think that's an important takeaway when we're practicing the skills.
Yeah,
You're
exactly.
not doing anything too taxing academically at first, just to get used to it.
Okay, so we can move on to our final assignment that I sort of thought in terms of, an assignment where it would put it all together, everything that we had learned, goals that we had for our students. And we were going to film this conversation, and hopefully we would see, some growth from the first one to this one in a very short span of time. And so what I'm curious about is, what was the main goal that you had for your students as you went into assignment 3? We'll start with Erica this time.
Well, this time I really had much higher expectations, obviously. Conversation expectations were higher. And also I switched to math, where we have many more partner conversations almost daily. Again, kind of the surface conversations. So students were used to, though, using math academic language, which I was looking for as well. And I felt my students would be more comfortable talking about math. So, and it was more of a natural thing in the classroom as well, based on what we were getting ready. It was the end of a unit on division, and so it was something that was more natural. So my expectations were pretty high, both for the academics and the conversations, because we had done so much practicing by that point in time.
What was your experience, Jen?
I wanted to continue working on clarifying and negotiating, and I have a feeling I'll be doing that all the rest of this year. And the one thing I added this time that I didn't do before is they had a paper that they were working off of to guide their conversations a little bit. So they had to look at a bunch of different scenarios on whether or not you should tattle or not tattle. And I think with first graders, it really kept them on task, that they had something in front of them just to kind of keep them on task.
Yeah, interesting. I also used something for them to have to talk about and work together on written as well.
Yeah, well, and that was a important realization for me, is that specifically when thinking about our ELD students and about scaffolding, is that the actual, organizer, whatever you provide for them on this piece of paper that's going to help them stay focused, that is a form of scaffolding in and of itself. So that was kind of an aha for me as we went through this class together. I had an interesting experience with assignment 3. I thought that because the kids had been doing a lot of sort of turn and talk, and it was based on academics, that they'd be ready for a very structured think, pair, share based on a common informational article, high interest that they had all read. And the first time that we tried to have this conversation, it was just a disaster.
What grade level? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so this is a ELD class. It's a 45-minute period, and it's 7th and 8th graders mixed. So I did not film them that day, and I wish I would have, because it was just such a disaster. And so I had to spend that night thinking about, okay, what do they really need, and how am I going to get them to the point where I want them? And what I realized is that they were really hung up on saying the right answer. Since it was an academic discussion, they wanted to find the correct answer in the article, and so they would start sentences and then go to the article and just repeat verbatim what they thought was the correct thing to say right out of the article. And so they were creating these sentences that were just, not just artificial, but ridiculous. They didn't work syntactically. They didn't make sense, but those students had no idea that what they were saying didn't make sense. They were just so focused on trying to find the right answer, quote unquote. So I think that, the three of us really realized the power and the necessity for modeling, and that day for me was huge. That I kind of was expecting more out of the older students, and I think what we're going to find is that the older the students are, the more they have to unlearn to be able to come into this new way of, talking to solidify your thinking. So I realized that, wow, I'm going to have to start at the very, very beginning with just what is the skill of having a conversation with a peer in my classroom that's related to what I'm learning.
They've just had years of practice of find the right answer.
Yes.
Work with your partner to have the right answer.
Exactly.
But not really getting comfortable with finding evidence to support that answer, and that some answers will be different than the person across
and that
that's okay.
That your own thinking is important. I really could see that they didn't think what they were thinking was important, so they're really not thinking. They're only thinking about certain buzzwords that are going to help them find the answer. And especially with these EL students, they're not confident that they can think appropriately, and they were not confident with their English. And so that was, both of those things working in tandem were really inhibiting really their learning.
Do you think it's better for EL students to be paired with an English-only student in these kind of conversations, or what do you?
I think they need a little of both. And so definitely when they have the opportunities to participate in the regular classroom setting and engage in conversation with the peer who's going to provide good modeling for them, that's absolutely ideal. But in the ELD setting, they also need to talk to each other, I think, a lot more.
Right. Well, I think when they talk with one another, that they may feel a little bit more confident about, because they know that person is going through the same thing that I'm going through. Because not only are they having to think about what they're saying, but they have to, they're also possibly translating in their head what they want to say and how to say it so it makes sense. Especially if they're being filmed, because
and
they
they're
right.
older.
Yes,
They're
absolutely.
more self-conscious.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. But having the other peers for modeling is so important as well.
I agree.
Yeah.
I want to go back to your scaffolding that you
Yes.
mentioned about, and I remember reading this from other people's assignments as well, that some students really did use the prompts that you came up with and you posted, and then some students eventually just really took a natural turn and they didn't need to use it. But I think it's always important to keep providing those because you do have kids, language-wise, they need those still to come up with a sentence and to have that support there.
Exactly.
So
and
it's kind of happening,
right.
a mixture of who used them and how often.
Right. And you used your Froggy to help with this, and I went with the fishbowl technique and had another student come up, and we went through what the expectations were as far as the conversations went, and so other students were able to comment after we did the fishbowl. They were able to comment on what they heard, and I thought that was really powerful.
Yeah.
And I felt that after that the conversations went really well. They went very well.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I was so impressed with. I had a question for us here, just asking, how did your students respond to the instruction given regarding conversations? And one of the things that surprised me is that how just a very small, just a few minutes of really specific instruction, really focused, and that time to model made such a huge change. It was so powerful. And so, that kind of takes me to one of our last points of discussion is what was your big aha moment or your big takeaway from this class? And because of that, what's going to be your next step in continuing on with these constructive conversations?
Well, I know with me, I think the biggest takeaway was that we have, as teachers, we have to model and scaffold and allow time for students to become good at conversations and being able to build on conversations. And for some students, it's going to come more naturally than others and more quickly. And that we need to provide lots and lots and lots of modeling and practice time for our students with things that maybe aren't as so academic, but things that they can talk about more easily, like with what you did, Jen, having them talk about tattling. Well, at any grade level, what a great conversation starter, because they've all had exposure to it, they know what it is, and so it's something that is not so academic, but they can really discuss it and talk about it and have building conversations. So that was one of the biggest takeaways, and even reading other posts from our team members and others that I read through. That whole piece of modeling and scaffolding and practice
Came
time
up on everybody's,
everyone.
everybody's.
So obviously in my classroom, that's what I want to continue on. I really focused on the clarifying, and I would like to move on to into the other areas as well, fortifying and negotiating and creating, so that we get well-rounded conversations with lots of depth. So that's my hope.
I think that's a good goal. What are you thinking, Jen?
Well, one thing that just stands out to me, how much my kids loved it. I mean, they got
Yes.
so excited when I
Agreed.
introduced, and when I said that you were coming in to see them too. That was so exciting for them. And so there's just this energy it created in the room. And I think just labeling it, we're going to have a constructive conversation. One of my second language learners went home to her mom and said, we had a constructive conversation in class today, and she's using that at home, and her mom was so excited to hear her using these fancy words. So that right there, I think, because we were telling the kids too that we were learning how to do it. And we were learning how to teach it,
Right.
so it was this real community sense. And I agree with everything you said, Erica. I'm on the same page with all that modeling, scaffolding.
Me too.
So I know my next steps in first grade, we're really going to transition into reading for understanding instead of learning how to read. So most of us are there now. And I want to add this into getting the kids to have constructive conversations on books that they're reading. And I saw definitely some examples in some of the assignments that I saw other teachers try, so I'm anxious to try those. And then to build it into the math as well. And maybe try some of their tools that we had that were provided for us in the class, the math planning tools, to get the kids to have constructive conversations.
Well, my big takeaway came from watching the video of the professor from UCLA, and she was talking about how a constructive conversation can be used as a common formative assessment. Mm-hmm. And one thing she said really stood out to me. I mean, I knew this, but just to hear someone verbalize it was really powerful. And she said there's two ways we can figure out what students are thinking. By listening to what they say and by looking at what they're doing. And I just thought, you know, how many times do I look at a student's work and I think to myself, what were you thinking? You know, and so
how did you get that?
I'm not really sure if the work by itself necessarily will help us figure out what they're thinking. Because if we don't know where they are in their learning and their thought process about a certain topic, we're not going to know how to scaffold for them what we need to teach them next. So I just realized the power of getting them to talk to each other and really listening to what is coming out of their mouth, because that is telling you exactly where they are in their thinking. And you know, from working with the 7th and 8th grade students and really observing where they are right now, I'm realizing that my next step is going to have to be to go way back. Mm-hmm. I really can't push forward. We really are going to have to spend quite a bit of time just creating that culture of classroom talk, an environment where it's safe to express your own thoughts, even if your English is not perfect.
Exactly.
Just because you have imperfect English doesn't mean that your thoughts are not really powerful and that they're not intellectually rich and important. And
right.
so that's what I'm going to be working on as we continue.
Yeah, and I think, you know, for after taking this class, you know, I really want to mentor other teachers, because I know at our school site, and Jen knows this too, I mean, Common Core is new, and mm-hmm. so I'm just so excited about what I learned from this class and being able to share what I've learned, and you know, some of those things like you mm-hmm. were saying, you know, most importantly, it doesn't matter what age your student is. I mean, going back and making it very, you know, teaching it very specifically, and that's going to be important for teachers. So I'm excited about not only working with my class, but hopefully working with other teachers as well.
Mm-hmm.
If I
Me
get those
too.
opportunities.
And as stressful as it was trying to finish these assignments,
yes.
you know, in the middle of our regular teaching jobs, when they offer another course, I'm definitely going to take it again, because
I will too.
I will.
It was so powerful, not just for me, but for my students as well.
Yeah.
So
I agree. So thank you.
Thank
for
you,
offering the
ladies.
class.
Thanks
Yeah.
for participating in this talk. And I'll look forward to our next class.
And thanks
together.
for convincing us, Carmen, to take the class with you.
Yeah, that was great.
welcome.
It was good.